right, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
We're happy that you are here.
Oh, shit.
I was just turning behind me to see what color of our sign decided to give you of itself today, because, you know, it's possessed and haunted, and apparently it's not on. So today it's just, you know what? It's what it is.
It's white.
It's clear. It's white. Yeah. So YouTube watchers, you just never know what you're going to get in the background of this show. And sometimes it changes mid show. Yeah. It's got a real bug in it. I'll tell you that. But this one's user error because we didn't turn it on. So whoopsies. We have a conversation today that I 100% know. Sometimes when I am going into a podcast, I know automatically, I'm like, oh, for my community, this one's going to be super resonant. And today is one of those days. This is a conversation that we have a lot on the show, but also like in all my other social spaces. And I have led this conversation a bunch too, and you're in it. And what I'm just trying to say is we are talking about sorting out maybe the faith that you grew up with, bearing virtually no resemblance to what we see in the world today, and trying to figure out what's worth hanging on to and what's worth letting go of. That's the short version. And I say that to you because, you know, before we bring in our guest, who you are going to love and enjoy and trust, and that matters in this conversation. We grew up similar. Amy and I grew up similar. What would you say? Let's take it from the positive angle.
Okay.
What's one of the most wonderful or like liberating shifts you have made in your spiritual life, faith, church, whatever? Pick a slot as you've gotten older.
Not believing in a literal hell.
We're just going to go for it. Sarah Bessie is the one who sort of gently led me down that road too.
Yeah. It took me a really long time. Yeah. And I didn't grow up hellfire and brimstone in my
Methodist church,
my own church, but I was exposed to so much fundamentalism.
Yep.
But it never sat right. I was horrified. Like it did not match with the character of God that I understood from my own personal experiences. And I've had some really supernatural experiences.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it took me a really long time to be like, wait, there are other people who don't believe this. So weird. Not weird. It's a subset.
Well, I did not know that we were allowed to examine that doctrine. I thought that was the center spoke of the wheel. I mean, that's how it was taught to me growing up.
Yeah.
Hell was absolutely terrifying, and I was scared of it every day of my life.
Yes.
And then subsequently scared because the way it was presented to me, it was also my responsibility to make sure none of my friends went to hell.
Right.
Like, that's on me, man. Like, their blood is on my hands. And thus, I terrorized so many of my peers and classmates because I was genuinely like, look, you're just going to go to hell. I don't like it any more than you do. But I've got a set of things you can say if you want to spare it, if you want to spare your eternity. Oh, my Lord.
It's can feel like psychological warfare.
Yes. And also abusive. And when I got to kind of pull up, 50,000 feet and look down on that and realize that, first of all, not only is the cognitive dissonance untenable, you just simply cannot relegate a all-loving God with eternal damnation torment. Those don't match. But also, in my subset, as you will, the ones who had made it through and were safe were all, weirdly, American Baptists. I guess we finally figured it out. Like after all this time of humanity,
Right.
the American Baptists got it down.
The only ones.
I mean, we weren't so much like everybody, the Methodists are going to hell. I mean, we didn't like your business. You know, we didn't like some of your theology. I mean, women were teachers, for crying out loud.
Right.
But it was evangelicalism in general, in a broader tent that had sorted it out. So the way it was taught to me is like, look, if you were born in rural China, I'm sorry, you know, that's a bummer. You should have figured out a way to believe in Jesus. So,
Yeah. So things are completely different now. Like I can choose
yes,
my faith not out of fear.
it's a humongous shift.
Like I went back and read the Gospels and then was like, oh, I still choose this.
It's so good. Like,
Because for me, it's the best version.
still a compelling story, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know.
And honestly, it was such a slow process, but like one of the first things was atonement theories. Like just one day I realized, wait, when you say theory, like it's just a theory, and oh wait, there's other ones?
Exactly.
It's like 7? Like people have never agreed on this.
That's 100% right. And this idea like, well, this is how Christ followers have always understood the gospel is simply not true.
It is not true at all.
And certainly about the idea of hell.
And then when you present what turns out to be a theory
Yeah.
as the only way to look at the story and to interpret the entire Bible, and then you don't even tell people there's other theories, like I was like, no, wait a minute.
I know. Although in my position, none of my faith leaders would have ever agreed that it was a theory. That was it. That was the baked in gospel. It was the agreed upon interpretation. Like I never met a faith leader, preacher, teacher type who prioritized curiosity until I was an adult. Ever. I never heard a teacher say, you know, I'm exploring that. Or there's more than one way to look at this, ever. My entire faith system handed to me through childhood and adolescence was certain.
Yeah.
I mean, certain beyond certainty. And so I didn't know that it was possible to explore different ways to think about the Bible and all the things.
Yeah, I was pretty mad when I found out. Just like, why would you? Obviously, you studied this in seminary. Like, you're aware. Is it possible you have ulterior motives of power?
What do you mean by that? Surely not in the church.
Anyway, yeah, that's probably my biggest shift.
Yeah, that's so big for me too. And so much so that my kids, because also going back to something we just said, that releases the fear valve entirely for me. And so, you know, as my kids all in their 20s are just thrashing around trying to sort out whatever they can, is there anything worth saving here? And I'll always like kind of pipe in from the peanut gallery and like say my little piece, and they're always like, "Mom, we know you don't believe in hell anymore. We're not afraid of it, okay?" I'm like, "Well, you know what? Exploration is safe because there's no hell." They're like, "We know. You keep telling us." I'm like, "Well,
Same.
anyway." Larry King would freak if he heard us having this conversation.
Oh my gosh, I don't. It was a couple months ago. Your mom and I were talking about. Oh my gosh, it's in John. That no one comes to the Father except through
me.
Yeah. And I was like, but does it have to be like on this side of the veil? Like, couldn't that be on the other side of the veil too? And she was like, well, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. My mom has a real curious spiritual posture. Like, she could, that's what I would think she would say. My dad has always found a lot of security in the system that he grew up in. And in a way that has, for my dad, it seems like put sturdy ground under his feet.
Yes, to be clear, it works for some people.
Yeah.
And they can still bear good fruit throughout their entire life.
That's true.
With that theology.
Yep.
But also he's managed to let it work for himself and not like pull all of our children aside and terrify them.
That's a good point. That's so true.
So,
yeah, I mean, even that old dog has learned new tricks up in his upper 70s here. Like, even his faith has evolved.
yes.
Which for my dad is surprising. And because he's always he's kind of a black and white guy. But that's a good one. Adjacent to this conversation, keeping it in the positive space, the top half of the glass. Let's do a little segment that we're just doing for this particular series called the Midlife Glow Up.
Midlife glow up, it's a glow up, yeah, we're shining bright.
I feel so determined to kind of change the narrative around midlife. You know, this is my whole thing right now. We are there. And there's no shortage of complications to work through at midlife.
True.
But there's also, like, it feels like a little kept secret from us that I didn't know until we got here, which is so many parts of midlife are awesome. Awesome. I wouldn't go back even 10 years for $1 million.
No, I wouldn't.
So I'd like to hear your thoughts of maybe something in this season of our life that has been an unexpected and welcomed change for you. And maybe it's something you chose. Maybe you tried something new or considered something new, however you want to frame it. But something that has been like, look what I've done here in midlife that I like.
Well, I think the most obvious answer would be I've tried podcasting.
You not trying. You're doing it.
I'm trying it, doing it. Yes, that's a big thing. I would have never guessed it a year ago. But also I did a lot of, not hard work, but like settling in, like sort of accepting the fact that I had a bit of a blank slate with part of my time.
Yes.
Like, I don't know how long ago it was, a year and a half ago. At some point I said to you, I have no idea. Like, but I see it opening up. I see the path being a little wider, like still kids at home, but one part-time job.
Yeah.
So I wonder, like, what am I going to do? And look,
I filled your time.
you filled my time.
I'm like, I have an idea. Hear me out.
But it was probably a year before you said that.
Oh, yeah. You'd created some room or acknowledged the room that was there, however you want to do it.
And then sat with the discomfort of not being productive on paper for a long time.
That's true. And I think I knew that. I mean, if we'd even gone back, 10 years in our friendship, I never imagined asking you to do this and you saying yes.
No.
Like, I don't see that being a thing that you would have been like comfortable with or wanted to do, and certainly had the time. But aside from that, even just the willingness to be like, I will try that.
No.
Is fresher. That's midlife. To me, that's midlife you.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't call it, I don't think it's confidence.
I think it's a little confident. It's not confidence.
It's confidence in knowing myself
Yes.
better.
Yes. That counts. That's confidence.
Not to discount the extreme amount of anxiety on some days.
Listen, don't get it twisted, okay? I mean, everybody calm down. There's still hand wringing, but
I said yes, scared.
you did. But I've said this before on the show, particularly like when you first onboarded last summer, but you said yes fast. Not just scared. You said it fast. And I mean, I pulled it out of left field and just dumped it on you with no preamble. You know, I wasn't like, I want to prepare you for something I'm thinking. I just dumped it on a phone call. And you said yes immediately.
I know.
I had a speech, I was ready to talk you into considering it.
Well, because when you spend a year or so thinking, I wonder what's going to come my way,
Yeah.
then when it does, you're like, well, I guess this is for me.
I love that. I find that story to be kind of ubiquitous at midlife for all the same reasons you just said. Like our kids are getting a little bit older. Some of them are launched. Our life is different at this point. I mean, hell, this very moment, I was in my home where I woke up. Nobody lives here right now.
No.
Not one person. And I'm just looking around going, everything is neat as a pin. There's no dishes in the sink. All my cups are in my shelf, every single one of them.
Your pantry looks incredible.
Thank you. It looks
Every
like a
day.
Pinterest board every day. And I'm just like, it's symbolic of just how much time and energy has been re-injected back into our lives. It's a fun time. That's so fun. That's so exciting. Like women coming into midlife going with the posture of curiosity like you had, I wonder what might come my way.
Yeah,
And stuff does.
it does.
I'm like, how about you come on a podcast and we'll do a photo shoot? I mean, I just put the most absurd things in front of you.
Well, to be fair, the photo shoot was way harder than podcasting.
I mean, honestly, you know how much I hate those.
Anyway, you?
Well,
What have you done
What
new?
have you been doing? That's what's new with you. I don't mean this to be trite because it's so obvious, because I got divorced in midlife. And so the whole thing of relationshiping at this age with a new person and everything that entails is just stunningly wonderful. I'm just shocked by it every day. I mean, I am shocked by it every day. I just am stunned at how much different I can be inside a relationship too.
Yes.
Because I'm midlife. I didn't get a new partner when I was 30. I got it when I was 47. I was 47. And so the midlife has given so many gifts to us of just clarity, and we're calmer, we're wiser, we're smarter, we're better than we used to be.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody is. We're not special, we're just older.
Yeah.
Everybody's like that. And so to have a new person introduced to my life in this stage and then realize how much I'm capable of, like how much vulnerability, which I have to work at, and that I can challenge my old paradigms of communication styles. And that's on me, and it always was. I'm not beholden to somebody else so that I can be a better partner.
Right.
That all of that has been so exciting for me to explore and examine and enjoy. Mm-hmm. Just enjoy so much. And so I think this was a wonderful time to figure out a new relationship. You couldn't have told me that 4.5 years ago.
No. And man, you picked a good one.
I did. I picked a good, I said, sheesh, it's not like I'm going to fall in love with the first person I date. I mean, I said I was not doing that. I've watched a bunch of people do that, and then they kind of lock into a relationship that's not much better than the one they left because they got swept up in the first time of feeling that way again. Mm-hmm. Well, we're, past the 3-year mark. So just, I struck gold right out of the gate.
Gold. Yeah.
So, okay. I'm going to kick that to you real quick, listener, because we'd like to hear your midlife glow up. And you pick a thing. It can, a role that you play, a relationship, your body, the way you think about the world. There's every category available to us at this stage of our life. So what in what place do you go, this has been such a positive change, and I love this part about midlife? So we want you to leave us a voicemail, and we might just play your message on the show. If you go to jenhatmaker.com/podcast, you'll see it immediately. There's a send voicemail button, and it's really just that simple. Just click it and leave a message for us. And we'd love to play some of those on the show, our own little midlife glow-ups in this listening community. So as mentioned, we are in a little series called Midlife Renaissance. And today's episode, which is why, circling back around, I said I knew going into this one, this community is going to gobble this episode up, because we are discussing how faith often evolves in midlife. I mean, this is a huge through line for me, as you know, and have spent the better part of a decade kind of sorting this out with you. And our hope is that you are evolving in your own midlife too, and so is your faith, because that should be. If our faith looked exactly like it looked 10, 15, 20 years ago, we're not paying attention. Like, evolution is a healthy sign. It's not a sign of doubt. It's a sign of engagement. And so nobody understands that better than today's guest, Erin Hicks Moon. Let me tell you about Erin. She is a writer. She's a podcaster. She is a spiritual explorer of the best kind. She's the resident Bible scholar and host of Faith Adjacent podcast, which is such a fantastic name. She's the author of a book that just recently came out called I've Got Questions, the spiritual practice of having it out with God. Erin is super passionate about just helping people reimagine their faith. And it's full of like honesty. It's full of humor. It's full of graciousness. It's not a template or a formula. There's not this fixed endpoint. And now the way that I think about it is exactly this. It's a much broader space than that. The kind of space, frankly, that I would have always wished for when I was younger, where everything was fixed, certain, and there was an end game, and doubt was frowned upon. So this is the opposite of all that. In addition to writing and podcasting, Erin's a director and a story coach for ARC Stories, where she helps people craft and share their personal narratives in a variety of formats. She's smart, she's funny, she's interesting, and more importantly to this conversation, she is a safe leader and thinker to invite into a conversation around a faith that is evolving. So you are going to love this episode. I think you're going to relate to a lot of it, and you're going to end up feeling hopeful and even safe inside this season of life that we find ourselves in. So with that, I'd love to welcome Erin to the show. Erin, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
It's been fun watching you like launch your book. We just have 100 of the best friends, like all in common.
I know.
Like
I know.
all my favorites are all of our favorites.
Yes.
And so, and Sarah wrote your foreword, which is, she's like, I guess the best person I know.
Listen, the generosity of this woman is overwhelming. I can't even begin to talk about it. She's so wonderful.
She's so wonderful. And just tell us this before we drill in, because do we have questions? What's it been like having this book out in the world for, it's only been out, when did it release?
Yeah, just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. It's new in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's a lightning rod for angst,
Yes.
if that's a fair thing to say.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
It's been so interesting to hear people who have finished and have said, I feel like I finally have language around the things that I've been really struggling with, and I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to verbalize it. And so that's been so so cool to see. And I'm, grateful that a book with, a lot of Backstreet Boy references can be
Sure.
a spiritual help to
In
people.
a good way. Yeah. Yeah, in a good way. And I noticed that your publisher let you sneak in a small handful of curses.
What a delight. We were pretty
delight.
upfront about that at the beginning, and they gave me 2, and then they actually expanded it to 4. So
They gave you 2.
Yes.
Oh,
and then I snuck an
boy.
Anne Lamott quote in that had it in there, so it was really
Tricky.
fun.
Oh, well, if you're
Oh.
quoting someone else.
Exactly.
That's what I used to tell my kids when I needed them to, they would say something to me and they're like, but it has a bad word, but they're saying something they heard. I'm like, when you're quoting, you could just say it to me and I'm not going to freak out.
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
absolutely fine.
So before we get into it, Amy and I were just doing a segment where we've nestled this episode in a midlife renaissance series because for us and for our community at large, one of the big pieces, frankly, up for sort of transformation and new beginnings, new imagining, new constructs, different way to think about it is obviously faith. That is one of the pillars of the midlife renaissance that we are reimagining, along with body image, along with like relational capacity, along with gender limitations, like what pieces of faith come and go. So this conversation is so appropriate for the conversation we're hosting, but we were just talking about some of our favorite midlife glow up elements, because much is said about she and I are in our early 50s, and
Okay.
so there's a lot of people going, well, these are all the terrible things about turning midlife.
Yes, exactly.
Here's where everything breaks down, and some of that is true, but we're also finding that this is a wonderful time to be
Yes.
alive. And so we were talking about things that we have embraced in a new way, or that we have considered for the first time, or that we love about getting older. So we'd like to hear like your answer for a midlife. You're behind us. You're not really quite to it, but it's next.
I do feel like I've lost a couple years over the past few months, but I'm just slightly behind y'all, just slightly behind.
Okay. Well, as you are steering your car into this season of life, what would you say is something new that you've been exploring lately that is bringing you like a lot of delight or a lot of joy or a lot of freedom, or pick a thing?
I don't know that this is particularly spiritual, but
Doesn't have to be.
I am super into smut now, just really into it. It's really great, just kind of throwing off some of those purity culture shackles and getting into some, just a little bit of spiciness. It's been a
I
good
like
time.
it. Give us an example. What are you liking? What are you reading?
Let's see. Listen, I'm reading a lot of like heaving bosom, Regent's
Throbbing
historical.
member.
Yes, exactly. Turgid,
yeah.
that type of a thing. Yes, that I am loving a historical Regency romance. What a delight. What a
Well,
joy.
I mean, who wouldn't love that? You know what I'm saying?
I know. Bridgerton got me really into it, and then I just started that journey. It's been
I
a
love
joy.
this.
Okay.
You got radicalized by Bridgerton. Who didn't? Who among us didn't?
Who among us has not been radicalized by Jonathan Bailey? I don't know anyone.
I don't know anyone.
No.
So I think that's fantastic. I bought my sister a whole thing that says, I love smut. Because she does. It's just a declaration of honesty.
And it has like genuinely kind of changed like the way I view sex and the way I view my body. And I mean, like I joke about it, but it is also very transformative for me personally.
Say less. I mean, we were all handed a sexual construct that was literally rigid. And so having a new imagination around sexuality and bodies and possibility and curiosity is a delightful
Change up.
byproduct of getting older and going, I'm going to release some of this stuff.
Yeah, I feel more comfortable in my body, who I am. I don't know. I like getting older. It has been a joy, truly. So
How old are you?
I'm 41.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, it just gets even better, doesn't it?
Yep.
It really does.
I'm telling you, the people are not lying.
No.
And that's why when women ahead of us go, oh, wait till you turn 60.
Yeah.
You'll love it here. I'm like, I believe you. I honestly believe you. I think you're telling me the truth. Because I used to feel like 50 was the cutoff. I don't know why that number was.
We're done after that.
When I was young, our grandmas, when they were 50, were 100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I thought 50 was like, that's the tipping point. That's
Yeah.
when you're basically done. You know, just
Wrap it up.
let's just like the plane is landing at that point. And I'm 50 right now, and I'm like, everything, love it all.
Yeah.
I mean, the knees are problematic. I mean, there are some
The knees,
Yeah,
like
there's,
the knees that we walk on.
there's some breakdowns.
Okay, that's
happening,
fine.
and that's all we ever heard of before.
Okay, that is so true.
Like-
and the hot flashes.
I used to,
Yeah.
joke that I just didn't ever want to get to that point where when I got together with my friends, the first thing we always said was, "Oh, my hips."
Oh God, I know.
And honestly,
But sometimes we do say that to
But
me.
sometimes
That
the hips
is-
are important.
that is a topic of conversation, but there's so much more.
There's so much more. It's so true. And getting older is not a tragedy.
No.
And it's a fun time to be coming of middle age, if you will, in our generation, because we just have conversations and freedoms available to us that I don't think our moms had access to. Or maybe they did, but we were just not in the right circle. I'm not really sure.
Behind
but
closed doors.
yeah, maybe that's true. But yeah, we're here for it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Let's get into your book.
Yeah.
Some questions.
Let's do this real quick before we ask you about the book. Can you just tell, like, our listening community in general, this is the arc of the book. This is the thing. This is what I've written. And then we're going to nestle all these questions underneath that.
Yeah. So the book is called I've Got Questions, The Spiritual Practice of Having It Out with God. And it is essentially a loose framework for walking through what it means to have questions, doubts, grief, anger in your faith. This process that has been colloquially known as deconstruction in our time and place. And also reconstruction. What does that look like? And I have had hundreds of conversations with people online and offline that are like, gestures wildly to the general state of the world and the church and what's happening, and just really overwhelmed with the heaviness and how things aren't adding up the way that we were told that they were going to add up. And so it's just kind of a meditation on that and what it looks like to walk through that process.
Easy. Light reading.
Very light.
This is breezy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So as you embarked on this, what are some actual spiritual practices, like in your own life, that have helped you rebuild and sustain your faith? Because you've come out the other side with such a strong faith, but what are the things you did each day that helped you do that?
I think, I grew up Southern Baptist, super evangelical, and I think there was this kind of checklist culture that we had that was like, hey, every day you need to pray for 20 minutes. You need to use the ACTS model. You need to make sure you do My Utmost for His Highest teen version. And you need to have all of these things that you've done every day. And my spiritual practice was releasing myself from that.
Yeah.
And
Me too.
saying, hey, you can take a break from these things. That doesn't mean that you don't love God or you don't have spirituality or faith. I started doing what I call anger voice memos in my phone, which is just me recording my phone while I scream about things to God,
like
at God, and then I immediately delete them. And it's very freeing. It is such a good way for me. And it wasn't always anger. Sometimes it was grief or frustration or, apathy. There were so many things that I felt like I could not be honest with God about. And moving away from that, I had to kind of open the floodgates and say, I'm going to be honest with you about everything. And then, my spiritual practice is a CBD drink on the back deck with my friends talking about life. I think we overcomplicate so much about what it means to, we do spiritual practices to feel connected to God, to be connected to God. And I think we overcomplicate that a lot with rigid checklists.
Yep.
Oh, man. Oh, boy. The way I used to do the checklists.
Oh, yeah.
The way.
That was how you knew if
And-
you were a good Christian or not.
Totally. And it was all baked in with fear and guilt. Those were the engines that drove the train. And then consequently didn't ever make me feel connected to God. Just made me afraid of God.
Yeah.
And for missing the checklist. Let's back it up like 10,000 miles. Let's talk about the beginning of this process, because it starts somewhere for all of us. You don't just arrive at an evolved understanding of God or of faith or of church or, any of the categories, the spiritual categories. But let's talk about the beginning of the process for you, for anybody listening who is just going, like I'm sitting in some cognitive dissonance I don't know what to do with. There's a lot of people still in a very inhospitable environment to ask questions. They're surrounded by certainty. They're surrounded by, pretty like baked in theology. And so let's talk about the beginning of this process, all of it, like what the start of it looks like.
Yeah. I think the beginning is one kind of looking at your origin story. Where did you come from? How did you get to this place? Who were the people who laid the foundations of how you understand God, how you understand faith, things like scripture, prayer, that type of a thing, if that's your bag. And I think when we know where we come from, we can seek a little more clearly where we are going and where we are now. And then I also think that owning your grief, owning your anger, lamenting and listen, I would rather just throw a casserole at sadness. Let's just do that. But really working through the grief and the sadness and the anger that accompanies, maybe watching your faith be weaponized or, coming from a church that has split over something really difficult or something personal in your life, something on a world stage. I think we have to be honest in that grief. And that is a really difficult thing when we're surrounded by toxic positivity in the church. And hey, just, everything's going to be okay. Well, sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes it really sucks. And we have to be honest about that.
Yeah. So for someone listening who feels like they have started this process, they've outgrown their faith community, but don't know where to turn, what advice would you give them?
I think, Sister Sarah, Bessie, that we mentioned earlier, she talks about how, there are a lot of people out in the wilderness and it's just a matter of finding them. And I think when you have that experience of, I don't quite fit in this faith community anymore, and I did, that's terrifying because it's isolating. And to bring something up and risk getting pushed out because it doesn't line up with everyone else's viewpoint, that it gets really lonely. And yes, there are people out there, but there may be a time when you are going to walk through some of this alone, because at the end of the day, your relationship with God is between you and God. Yes, collective spirituality is deeply important, but there is also the aspect of individual spirituality. And I think, Eugene Peterson calls faith the long obedience in the same direction. And I think sometimes you look up when you're on that road and you see that maybe the people that you're with, they don't have the same goals that you do. They don't have the same, motivations that you do in faith. And, but I do think in the same way, if you look around while you're on that path, there are others that do. It just might be a little more difficult to find them because They're not, carefully sorted into, denominations
right.
or whatever. But it's a process. It's 100% a process. And we feel like we don't have time or everything's so urgent, but it doesn't have to be that way.
I have a question for your personal story because I grew up almost identically. It's so interesting how the Southern Baptist Church, for a certain generation, was, I guess, the exact same everywhere. My Southern Baptist Church was in Kansas, but it sounded just like yours in Texas.
Yeah.
All the same things, just literally all the same
Copy
things.
paste.
Yeah, and so I'm curious if you had either a moment or a particular doctrine or memory or season even in which you started a different story. Like, did something happen? Did you go, oh boy, I'm really stumbling on this one thing? And then that sort of evolved into an entire journey. But I'm curious about that for you.
So I don't know that there was one thing. And the way that I'm sort of understanding an active faith now, what I'm seeing is like people who have active faiths, or even in my own life, is that you go kind of perpetually through these periods of questioning and doubting. That's just something that happens if you are a person who's paying attention and lives in the world. And I think we want our faith to be like perfect and stagnant and like a statue on, in a museum, but that's not what it is. And, but for me, some of those periods were, you mentioned the SBC. I think as I got into college and I saw that they essentially see women as second class, believers. I was like, oh, well, that doesn't feel like Jesus. That's weird.
Yeah.
And then, I'll be honest, like when you came out as affirming, I remember where I was. I got like a news alert about it. I was sitting in a fast food restaurant with my kids, and I remember going, okay, like I want to figure this out. Like I want to see what this is about. The 2016 election.
Yeah.
But anything. And I don't think it necessarily has to be like a big global thing, the diagnosis or a broken relationship or, those sorts of things. I think anything can bring about this. There was, like a chapter in Beth Allison Barr's The Year of Biblical Womanhood, like completely rocked my world just a few years ago. So I think that we're just always in this process, and there are times that it's quieter. There are times when I think those questions get louder, and that's just the life cycle of faith.
How do you begin to let go of rigid or outdated beliefs without feeling like you're losing your faith entirely?
No, it feels bananas.
Yeah, it really does. But I think some of that is that we've conflated having a belief system with loving God and being loved by God.
Yeah, I like that distinction.
Yeah,
Yes.
we've kind of, it's good. I'm not saying it's not good to know what we believe. I'm not. That's the catechisms, the creeds, like those aren't bad things, but that's not the full picture. Like in my relationship with my kids, I've known them since they were born. I've known them in every iteration of themselves, but they've also changed since they were little, since they were babies. And while I have new understandings of them all the time, and I'm learning new things about them as they grow and as they change, I've had to see them in new light and new perceptions. That doesn't mean I've stopped having a relationship with them, or I've stopped loving them, or they've stopped loving me, or being close to them, or wanting to have a connection with them. I think we can look at our beliefs, and we can still have a relationship with God. We can still have faith, but it doesn't have to look the way everyone else thinks it should look.
I love that. It kind of along that same line, you talk about faith being a dynamic, which is kind of what you were just describing. And so in broad terms, I guess, as you know it now, because you will not be the same
Right.
10 years from
Exactly.
today.
Yeah.
But like, as you know it today, for you, what's the faith dynamic that you are experiencing right now that perhaps feels more inclusive, or that it has evolved into a new place? Like, how would you describe your spiritual dynamic right now?
I think for a really long time, I wanted to be correct and I wanted to be right. And I wanted to have all of my checkpoints organized. But I think the older I get, the more I realize that I'm probably wrong about at least 50% of this. And we all are, right? Like we're all fumbling around in the dark, as Paul sort of says. But I think if God wanted us to have correct beliefs, maybe Jesus would have come out of Mary with a systematic theology textbook.
That's right.
And that's just not like Jesus was a person who had relationships and lived in the world and had an economic status and, was a refugee, like all of these things. It's more human than that. It's more relational than that. You're not going to get it out of, 3 years of seminary. And I think part of this is that we've decided that Ephesians says something like, but because of our perfect and correct understanding of theology, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. But that's not what it says. It says because of his great love for us. And we have, I think it's that, I hesitate to say like humility and like, look how humble I am. But this like just knowing that you do not have this figured out. The way that you view faith and God and Jesus, the Holy Spirit, none of that. You do not have it right. You are guessing as best you can. And that has, for me, made me more, I guess, maybe inclusive is the word, maybe just softer around it. It's just not as rigid as it can't be because we just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's one question about your faith that you're still really wrestling with?
Holy Spirit. Like how is Holy Spirit, like my Holy Spirit telling me one thing, and then over here at, whatever rally is going on, we've got people saying Holy Spirit is telling them this. What's that about?
What's that about?
Really love some answers
Work that
about
out
that.
for me.
Yes, exactly. I have questions about that particular practice that we adhere to.
That is a conundrum.
It is.
And I think a big part of the whiplash that a lot of us are feeling currently, as faith people, whatever we are, is that sense of such opposing ways of understanding God, Jesus, what God's up to, what he wants for this world. And we see it in such stark ways and just go, how are we believing in the same God?
How are we reading the same Bible?
It is a mind bender. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, because this is this, of course, you've put out a book about spiritual evolution and deconstructing and reconstructing. And, people love those words. I'm sure you haven't received any.
They're not hot button at all.
No, pushback on those terms. But how are you reckoning with the two kind of faiths that exist in America? Let's just put it in our little weird context over here, our Western context, and how disorienting that feels.
There are a lot of CBD gummies in my drawer, so that's one way.
Yeah.
But I think it is saying out loud and verbalizing and honoring the fact that there are two different Christianities in America. And I am not going to be so, whatever, to say that I have the right one. But what I do know is that what I'm trying to do in my life, the people I'm surrounding myself with, what's important to those people are walking through life in ways that pay attention to the Sermon on the Mount. Like, blessed are the meek, blessed are the peacemakers, those types of things. And paying attention, like, is the thing that I'm doing, is the reason I hold this belief, not because I'm a conservative or a liberal or a Republican or a Democrat, but because it is moving me towards the fruits of the Spirit. What are those things? And so I think we have this idea now that Christianity is, Jesus in an Uncle Sam hat, jacked and telling you that, make America great again. That is a version that you can go with. My friend Savannah Locke, she did this essay the other day on her Substack, and the title of it was Loving Jesus is Loving a God That You Could Beat Up. And I loved that because we have made meekness and peacemaking and love and joy and empathy weak.
That's
and
right.
we've made it wrong and bad. And I will not let somebody walk out the door with something that I love that much, weaponizing it like that. I can't. And I understand people who say, I'm out on this. Like, I can't even look at this anymore. I have no problem with
get
that
it.
because I get that.
Yeah.
But for me, I cannot let that be the only version of God that people see.
Same.
Yeah. And it's not the only version. It's just the loudest
It's
version
just the
right
loudest.
now.
100%.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm shocked when I actually have conversations with people who I really did not know grew up in the church, like don't know their background. And it turns out we have so many of the same beliefs and our faith is evolving like on parallel tracks, but so many people just choose not to identify that way right now.
Yeah. Which we can understand.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice as they navigate this, as they ask the questions, as they wrestle, what would it be?
I think if you grew up in the church like we did, you have rapture trauma, which means that you feel like you don't have time for anything. There's not enough time. I wish we'd all been ready. DC talk, the whole thing. But we do have time. We have time to sit with things. We don't have to be rushed. And I also think my friend Pastor Trey, which if you don't follow Pastor Trey, please go do that right now. He said something in a conversation that we had on my podcast that really, like, I immediately pulled a Post-it out and I wrote it down, and it is still on my computer right now. I'm looking at it right now. And he said, the question was, what do I do when someone that I love or that loves me says that the reason I'm going through a deconstruction or, an evolution is because I'm a heretic or I'm a backslider. I want to sin, that's a popular one. And he said, get comfortable being called a heretic. And that was so profound for me because I'm a people pleaser from way back. And what I want is for everyone to be okay with where I am. I want to be understood. I want to be perceived correctly, but that's not always going to be possible. And you are going to come up against the idea that you are doing this out of selfish reasons. I've never met one person who has gone through deconstruction and or reconstruction because they wanted to sin more.
Of course.
The overwhelming pattern is that they want to figure this out. And at the end of the process, they end up with a faith that they say is stronger than what they began with.
That's right.
So there are going to be bad actors in this process that their intention is to control you. Their intention is to shame you into falling in line. Don't give them that. Don't let that propel you towards something richer and something more vibrant than what you're in right now. I think, questions are, if I'm in a relationship with someone and a friendship or, my marriage or whatever, if that person has done something to hurt me or that made me mad or grieved me or I felt misunderstood or they misunderstood me, I have two options. I don't love a binary, but I have two options. I can either be honest and say, "Hey, can we talk about this? Can we have this conversation? I really feel like something's amiss here." Or I can not, and I can kind of devolve our relationship into something that's superficial and shallow because it doesn't have any depth if I'm not willing to be honest with people. And so I think the same is true in our relationship with God. It's worth it to be honest with yourself and God in your questions, because most of the time what I see is a faith that ends up with more vibrancy and joy and peace than anyone began with.
That's my experience too. And I found the landing spot far more welcoming and hospitable than I had hoped for.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a bit of a blind leap.
It is.
When you are leaving one space that is very structured and very certain. And there's a safety to that and a security to it. So it's a blindfolded leap, to be honest.
It is. It takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of courage.
It does. But there's so many like amazing seekers out just wandering around the streets, like asking the same questions and wrestling for the same reasons. And I have found that to be such a source of strength for what started out as a pretty lonely space.
Yeah. I think sometimes it has to get worse, maybe a little bit before it gets better.
I agree.
And that's not count.
Yeah, it does. But the upside of that is it does get better, and that is 100% my experience. And I remember reading something that Dallas Willard said. Somebody asked him the question, "How would you describe Jesus?" And this is a Bible scholar.
Yeah.
This is a brilliant theologian.
Legit.
And he's like, relaxed.
Oh.
And I remember thinking, what the?
Yeah.
Like, not a person in my life ever presented Jesus, God, faith, or church as relaxed.
No.
I mean, it was the opposite of that. And I thought, I like that.
Yes.
I like that. I want to pin that to the board.
Yes.
That I think that is something worth searching for and discovering and leaning into and ultimately living inside.
Yeah.
Not that everybody likes that.
No. But I think that's what he was talking about with my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Yeah, exactly.
I do. I think we put so much. I mean, I talk to people all the time that are like, I'm a mom and I have 3 kids and I'm going back to school and I have a part-time job and like, when am I supposed to spend time with God? And I just want to go, hey, you don't have to do that. Like, you can take a break. You can find God in the minutia of your life. You don't have to sit down and read something every day. You can be more relaxed about it. I love that. Right. That's so good.
I do too.
Yeah.
Can you, you really absolutely dig into a lot of the actual questions, the actual spaces, the actual process of what it looks like to kind of wrestle your faith to the ground in your book. We've barely touched on it. So can you just tell our listeners, this is a great place to not just find your book, but find you and follow you and listen to what you're saying, the conversations that you're hosting.
Yeah, I'm on the internet at Erin H. Moon, pretty much in every iteration, Substack, Instagram, website. I have a podcast, Faith Adjacent, with Jamie Golden, Knox McCoy, and Evan Dodson. And we are frequently talking about things like this. We are, slightly heretical. We definitely asked N.T. Wright if he thought Paul was hot. So that's the vibe.
Great. Yeah.
And then you can get, I've got questions anywhere you buy fine reading materials. And if you're not in a position to buy it right now, requesting it from your library is always a great place to
absolutely
to support. So
Good.
Okay. I'm so happy that you're here today. Thanks for having this conversation with us.
Delightful conversation with the two of you. Thank you.
100%. We're proud of you, and just rowing our little boats right alongside of you, and grateful that you have decided to, put your hand to this particular plow. And it just serves so many other people who need the language, who need the space, and even the permission to do it. And so it matters. It's good work.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and the good work that you have done also has been really meaningful to me in my life. So thank you for that.
Right on. Okay, Erin. Until next time. All right, you guys, absolutely. I have a feeling a bunch of you will want a little bit more. That was just not enough, but it is a start. And so if you go to jenhatmaker.com under the podcast tab, I'll have this whole episode for you. You can share it easily, like click of a button, and I'll round up all of Erin's stuff too. The links to her book, her podcasts, her socials, because she is interesting. She's very funny. And smart, and I think you will be highly grateful if you haven't already that you start following her. And I love this conversation nestled in the midlife renaissance, because for a lot of us, that spiritual piece is part of it. It's one of the roads that we're on right now as things are adjusting and transitioning forward and changing. And so I was really excited to bring somebody like Erin on to walk us through that conversation. So more to come in this series, more interesting guests and awesome questions, and sort of as we navigate this space that so many of us are sharing right now. So thanks for being here, you guys, and we'll see you next week.